But it's great to meet you. I love your story, and I want to begin with, we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of the pandemic. How did you
Mhm.
survive COVID that time period, and how did it change you?
Okay, so how did I survive COVID? Well, first of all, we, just like everybody else, we locked down, quarantined, sheltered in place, did all the things. So at the time going into COVID, we had an office. And so immediately we went to working online. And so for me, I had wanted to do that for a while. So it kind of felt like, okay, this is an interesting transition. Wasn't really sure how much our clients would be into that or the team would be into that. So we did that. And I think the first 2 months were really bad.
Yeah.
I think everybody was just kind of like, I'm not going to spend money. I'm not going to do anything. I don't know what's going to happen. So there's like 2 months where it was really iffy. I think like a lot of businesses, we took advantage of PPP loans and all that kind of stuff to really bridge that gap. After that 2 months, then things came back. So kind of maybe as you've heard about, there's a lot of people who at that time, they took it as a sign of, let me start something.
Yeah.
I'm working at a job or I got laid off or I have extra time or whatever it was. They're like, let me start something. And they did. And so, of course, when they do, they come to us for setting up the infrastructure and the legal structure for all that. So then after 2 months, it just came right back.
Yeah. So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living. I'm going to put you
Mhm.
in front of a bunch of grade school kids. It's career day. And one of the
Yeah.
kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer
Yeah.
that child?
So what I tell people is I help people start businesses, and specifically I help creative people like artists and musicians, writers, people in TV and film start businesses. So take whatever it is that you're doing creatively and turn it into a business. So which is two different things. So it's for me it's being aware of the creative side and understanding what it means to be creative and how that all feels and works, but then kind of bringing it into and helping my clients get into the mode of, all right, but you're also a business owner. If you're doing this for a living, you're also a business owner, and there's things you need to understand legally and business wise. So that's what we help people do.
And that's so essential because, I mean, there's a lot of artists that have left brain tendencies, but
Right.
overall, when you're in that creative mold, they just, I know personally, I paint a lot. I do different things that are creative, and there's levels of business that just elude me, you know?
Right.
And I think that happens for a lot of creative people, which is why there's agents and all these other teams
Sure.
that are around these people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely right. I mean, I think as an artist, it's really easy to want to just stay in the creative mode all the time. But, and I'm a creative too. I'm a writer and I've, been a graphic designer and freelancer in my life. So I understand that. So I think
Yeah.
that's also the thing I bring to the table is I'm not just sort of saying, well, you should do this stuff. I mean, I've been in their position and I'm in that position. But what I say to people is even if you have a manager, even if you have an agent, you need to know enough to know if they're doing their job the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So you're delegating. Like if you're delegating that part, like as with any business, if I'm a mechanic and I want to delegate to like a assistant mechanic, I need to know enough to make sure this guy's doing the right thing. So it's kind of the same thing. If you're, I would tell a lot of my clients, hey, even if you have an agent manager and they're handling everything for you, make sure that you have a good contract with them. Make sure you have really good expectations set so that whatever it is that you need, they're giving to you. And if they don't, you have some sort of tool to stop it.
So did you see the Elvis movie with the Colonel in it?
Not yet. Not yet.
Do you know anything about that history of the Colonel with him and how he managed Elvis?
A little bit, and I'm not sure how accurate what I do know is.
Yeah. Yeah, you should watch the film because I'd be curious about your opinion as to how much this dude ripped Elvis off. If it was
Yeah.
really elaborate or if it's glossed up for Hollywood. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go with it.
I mean, I would guess it's a combination,
Yeah.
and what I see is this. There's a lot of, like I said, I grew up in LA. I know a lot of people who, are creatives in some way, whether it's film or music or whatever, people I grew up with, people I knew growing up. And what I've noticed with the people who do the best as artists, as creatives, like the top level creatives, they all underneath it have real good business acumen.
Okay. Okay.
Like they all underneath it know, like, okay, if I don't understand this contract, hire a lawyer and make sure that I understand it.
Yeah.
Because I always tell people there's a level of agency, right? So I think what you see in the classic situation with an artist is they get ripped off by somebody. And, I've been around enough to know there's a lot of shady people, there's a lot of sharks who are looking for creative people they can latch onto and feed off of. So they're out there. But then I also tell artists and creatives it's a little bit of tough love in that there is some agency on your side too. So these contracts you're signing, if you sign a contract that signs away your catalog to somebody, you're an adult, you signed it, right? And you had the opportunity to go to a lawyer or go to someone who could have told you, no, we're not going to do that. Like we're going to do a different thing. So, something in my practice can be a little bit tough love. Like we're not going to sign this contract. I
Yeah.
mean, you can if you want to, but now you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were in the third grade, what did you want to be? What was your dream to grow up and become?
I think up until probably high school, I thought that I was gonna go to space in some way.
Yeah.
So I think astronaut, which I mean, I think for a lot of people that might be a common thing, but it was funny because I think it was probably like late teens where I'm like, yeah, probably statistically it's not going to happen,
Yeah. Well, let
you
me
know.
ask you this. How did you split that zygote in your life to be creative, yet look at things from a legal standpoint? How did all of this kind of the seeds get planted to grow into who you are today?
So I've always been a creative person. So I've always been an artist. I've always been a designer, a musician, writer. Like I love making stuff. I mean, to this day. So that's what I did for a long part of my life. Like my first job was making software. So like I actually started making CD-ROMs with a company in the 90s when I was a teenager. And so I was always doing something like that. And so what ended up happening is, so working in these creative industries or working for startups or working for like established companies, I started to get more and more interested in the substructure of everything. So I was like, how does this all work? Like, how are they pulling in investment? How are they protecting their brand? How are they hiring? How are they building companies out of this stuff? So then that's what inspired me to go back to law school. Because I was like, well, I want to know, and I felt like that was the like secret rule book that I wanted to know more about
Yeah.
in terms
Yeah.
of like how does this all work? And so that's what got me there. And my opinion of law is, yeah, there's rules and there's structures and there's all kinds of parameters, but I look at it like design. We're looking at it like we're designing. So if we have a contract, if you and I have a contract, we have the opportunity to design our relationship, to design the way we want things to work. And I think by default, a lot of people don't take that opportunity. They'll just be like, well, things will work out, and hopefully they do.
Yeah.
But there is a way that you can actually set up, hey, we want it to work this way, and approvals are going to work this way, or payment is going to work this way. There's so many things people can do, and that got me interested.
So, what was the first book you read when you were a kid that really opened up the doors and made you want to read more or write?
Read more, right? Let me think. I remember when I was a kid, it's funny, I think we're going to stay on a space theme. I had a book about the future. And so I really like to look at books about the future. And I wish I could remember what the book is, but I had books on the solar system. But there was one book, and I wish I could remember the title because I actually want a copy of it, where it would have like these paintings of colonies in space and spacecraft and like, what we're going to have in the year 2100. So I was always like really interested in like futuristic stuff. I mean, that was an 80s view
Yeah.
of the future, which some of
Uh-huh.
it's outdated, but some of it, I have some of it. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the best first concert you ever saw? One that just blew your mind.
Let me think. Best first concert. I think it was probably early on, like just going to like, Southern California in the 90s, like going to like punk rock shows with my friends. That was great. I
Yeah.
mean, just like the energy, going into any show at that time, the energy and just kind of like just the feeling of like release and all that stuff. So like, I like that was what I was into sort of as a teenager, as a kid.
So who's a hero for you?
Hero. Let me think. I don't know if I have necessarily a hero.
Yeah.
I look up to, I mean, I think like a lot of people, parents and grandparents. My grandfather was an artist, and I don't know if I'd say he's a hero necessarily,
Yeah.
but he is kind of an inspiration in terms of like he was very focused on his art, very like dead set on like, I'm gonna do what I want to do, and it's gonna be art. And so for me, that I actually tried to take some of that of like, he took it to an extreme in some ways, but I take it in a way that like you have to kind of fight for your art. You have to fight for your creativity. So that's kind of the inspiration I take,
Yeah.
you know.
So in your professional life, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Um, Okay, so a few pieces of advice, and it's cool because like these are pieces of advice that I've collected over my life, and I mean, people can apply them how they want. But one of the first good pieces of advice I got is there was a dude who I was babysitting for actually in high school, like for his kid, and he told me, after one day, when I was finishing, he tells me, he goes, "Hey, so if you really want to like make a lot of money," and like this guy, like I think he made a lot of money. He's like, make jobs, create jobs for people. So that's what he said, like make jobs, make that be your pursuit. And so I like filed that one away. And then later on, I told you I was working in software and stuff as a late teen too. And the guy I was working for, he told me like I was working for him and he's like, hey, you're never going to get rich uh, working for me.
Yeah.
Or working for anybody. And so again, some of that's true, some of it's not true. I mean, there's a lot of people who do really well, as working for somebody, but I think for me, those things resonated and made me really want to make my own path and figure
Yeah.
out how do I make my own business? How do I take what I'm doing and make it self-sustaining?
So every day you wake up, you're helping people achieve their dreams. What is that motivation for you every day to wake up and not only to help people, but for you to evolve as an artist and as a business person as well?
I think first of all, it feels amazing. Sometimes I forget that I'm having an impact on people, and I'll have phone calls with people where I've said something maybe like a month before, and they'll talk to them now, and they'll be like, "Hey, the thing you told me last month, it really worked," and like that conflict I was having, it went away. I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I can't believe, like in my back of my mind, like I can't believe that worked.
Yeah.
I know that it is. I'm confident enough to say that it does, but sometimes you forget. So those feelings like that, when I kind of take things that to me I almost take for granted. I've been doing this for long enough where it's like, yeah, like I could do this in my sleep. But for a lot of people I'm encountering, this is new stuff. And so for me, it's just like to kind of blow people's minds a little bit and be like, hey, there's actually a different way. Like you can run your business and run your life a completely different way that's going to serve you better. So I think that motivates me. I think in being around people who are doing things and doing new things, as an artist, as a creative, it kind of expands my view of what's possible.
Yeah.
So like if I'm ever feeling, well, will people like this? Will they not? I have people who are in the weirdest niches, doing the weirdest things, and people love them. So I'm like, you can do anything.
Yeah, for
One
sure.
can do anything.
So what's been one of your favorite, what one of your best success stories, best client success stories?
I mean, I have a number of them. One thing I often think about sort of as the model client, I'm not going to use any names, but just kind of describe
Sure.
hypothetically speaking, I guess, what they did. So I had a client who started a Kickstarter probably 8, 9, 10 years ago, like around, I think around 2016. They're a household name now. And I've watched them go from that. Like, I mean, not household name, but I mean, you can find their products in any bookstore
Yeah.
in the country, any bookstore. They have spin-offs and this and that. So it was really cool to kind of go from, hey, we have this nascent idea, like we're going to see how it works, we're going to see how it goes. They blew it out of the water. And then, they slowly built up over the years. And so it's really interesting to see that progression. So that's a success story. Sometimes they're even smaller success stories. Like I'll have clients who, and maybe you've had this experience, starting a business, starting something new is really scary. And so sometimes it's more humble where it's like, I've told clients that who are like overthinking things, trying to plan everything out, overanalyzing. I'll tell them, hey, just set it up so that I can pay you $1 online for something.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be great. Just make it so that I can go put my credit card and pay you $1. And if someone does that, to me, that's like, okay, you've entered the world of business. You're
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Wow, that's great, man. So of all of these things that you've done so far and achieved and overcome and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
Um, I think being able to have a different way of practicing law that at first, it's funny because I mean, I don't know how much you follow law and legal practice. Most people don't. So if you don't, that's fine. But
Sure.
when I started practicing law in 2013, it was a very different world. Like, and social media was nascent and all this kind of stuff. But it was still very much a world of like, if you're a lawyer, you're wearing a suit and you're on a website looking kind of angry kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's changed. I mean, and lawyers now show up in a lot of different ways. So I think for me at the time, like I've really felt like I'm an outcast. I stick out because and I started law older, so I didn't really feel like I had to fit into that. And so at the time, I really felt like I don't know, like am I doing this wrong? But I stuck with it. I stuck with it, and so it's interesting to see the world evolve with me rather than it be like, well, I'm just this outcast. But like now it's like it's what I'm doing is socially acceptable in some degree in the legal circles.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me ask you this. If you were to have a dream tonight, you ran into the senior in high school version of you, 18 years old, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained in your life up to this point. What advice would you impart on that young version of you?
I'd probably tell myself to stay with it.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I've had a lot of projects and a lot of things I've done over the years that I quit too early. And this is advice I'd give to anybody. Like, make sure you love what you do so that you can stay with it. And, don't like things take time to create. We're not like, and this is something I even tell myself every day. Like, if you start a podcast or a newsletter or something, I think a lot of people are looking for quick wins. And it's always kind of been that way, or quick kind of, explosive growth.
Yeah.
You got to be used to playing, like if you were a band, playing for years in a venue with 4 people.
Yeah.
You got to do that. And that's part of it. And so I think when I was younger, I would do things and like, oh, nobody likes it. And, this isn't good. And I'd quit and move on to something else. If I had to tell myself, I'd be like, take it to the end, take something to the end, and then decide.
Yeah. Yeah. So everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, I think I'm someone who, let me think about this, um, is constantly growing. I think that I'm always looking for ways that I can grow, and internally, like, I think all the external stuff. One thing I've learned just sort of as an adult, as an older adult, is anything that you want to change outside, you kind of have to change inside first, if that makes sense. Like, you have to
Yeah.
change your perception and the way that you see yourself in order to make changes happen on the outside. So, I think I'm someone who's constantly trying to analyze and pay attention to what's going on. How do I feel about things? How am I really reacting? How am I showing up for people? I'm always trying to learn more about that.
Yeah. So if anyone out there wants to hire you, see your work, anything about your world, reach out. How can they do that?
So the best way would be, we have a website, counselforcreators.com. And you can go on there, and that's a great place to go if you are looking for any kind of legal help, any kind of help setting up the business. That's the core of what I do every day. But then I'm also pretty active on social, but I'm active on like LinkedIn. So I really like writing on there and sharing on there. So anyone can search my name on LinkedIn and you'll kind of see things that I post pretty consistently there.
Right on. Chris, man, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,